Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1290B, and today's date is May 26, 2017, and the title of the episode is The Plan Continues to Unfold. Next phase has been launched. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, in yesterday's report, we saw that the travel ban that Trump has been trying to get through, well, it's been shot down again by the Fourth Circuit Court. And now he's going to take it to the Supreme Court. And we'll have to see how that turns out. And we can see that the deep state, they are trying to stop him at every turn. And this is why a lot of the things that he is doing, it is behind the scenes, trying to set things up. And I'm going to explain that in a little bit. But first, Jared Kushner. Right now, it looks like the FBI is looking at Jared Kushner for collusion with Russia. They're saying that he is a target, but again, they don't have any evidence. They don't have anything there. They're looking into what he has been dealing with. Has he been dealing with the Russians? And most likely he probably has been. But does it mean that he's dealing with them in a way where it's Russian collusion, or is he dealing with them in terms of business? Now, the Kushner family, the father of Jared Kushner, he was arrested. He has a criminal background. We see that Jared Kushner, yes, he does some underhanded things, and I don't believe that he should be advising Trump in office right now. I think he should be removed. And it looks like Steve Bannon actually mentioned this around 2 months ago, where he expressed concerns that Kushner's meeting with Russian officials could harm Trump's presidency. Now, does this mean it's Russian collusion? No, just because you meet with Russians, just because you're doing business with Russians, just because you're banking with Russians, it doesn't mean it's Russian collusion. Think about all the people that you do business with, where the bank does business with, where your money is, and things like that. I mean, if you're in business for yourself, you might one day do business with someone that is Russian. It doesn't mean that you're colluding with that individual. You have to prove that individuals are actually colluding and there was a plan, a scheme. You just can't say, well, he did business with Russia, or Trump has done business with Russia, so that's Russian collusion. And this is where they're getting into the problem of trying to tell everyone that there is collusion, because you need to prove that link. Yeah, propaganda is great, where you can say like, oh yes, he had an investment with Russia, or he spoke to a Russian, but you really need to prove it beyond that. And this is where they're having the problem, because they have nothing. Now, the FBI is refusing to hand over Comey's memos to Congress. The House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz said that the FBI had decided to withhold documents, including memos, notes, summaries, and recordings requested by his committee in regards to the ongoing Russian probe. This was revealed in the letter sent by Chaffetz to the FBI, responding to the agency's decision to withhold the documents requested by the committee on May 16th. Now, according to a statement by the Oversight Committee, Chaffetz requested the memos, notes, summaries, and everything else to assist in the committee's investigation of the FBI's independence, and which are outside the scope of the special counsel's investigation. Now, the documents are due June 8th, but that may not happen, as it appears the FBI is suddenly unwilling to cooperate. The FBI is withholding those documents, citing to the appointment of Robert Mueller as special prosecutor. And Chaffetz says Congress and the American people, well, they have the right and duty to examine this issue independently of the special counsel's investigation. And he's right. We should be able to see all this information. I mean, it was read to the New York Times, and the New York Times published what was read to them. We should be able to see the memo. I believe he's right, and that should be out there. Now, it looks like Bannon is back, and the escalating crisis surrounding the Russian investigation with the special counsel, it looks like they brought Bannon back because he is very good at handling this. So he is now back working with Trump, and he's handling certain parts of the Russian investigation, and he is going to help out in this area. Now, I wanted to talk about what Trump has been doing out in the Middle East. Now, we can see the corporate media, they've been showing his speeches. They've been, picking apart his speeches. Actually, Trump didn't even write these speeches. He's out there giving the speech they want him to give. Just like he fired the Tomahawk missiles into Syria and they hit the base, but he warned Russia, Syria. They removed the planes, they removed personnel, and really the base really didn't sustain that much damage. They were flying planes out of there an hour later. And of course, what happened was the corporate media was like, oh, wow, now Trump is the president. He's our president. And we're hoping that he invades Syria now. Well, that really didn't happen. But he got the deep state on his side for a little period of time. Then the North Korea came up, and again, the information was that the USS Ronald Reagan, the USS Carl Vinson, the USS Nimitz, they were all going towards North Korea. And then it turned out that none of them were going to North Korea, and things started to break down. So he is out in Saudi Arabia. He visited Israel. He visited Brussels with NATO, met the Pope, and he was talking about extremism, terrorism. But behind the scenes to all of this, and we need to understand what is happening here, the system is breaking down. And we mentioned that there was a representative that he sent to the Belt and Road system. He spoke to Xi Jinping in Mar-a-Lago because he didn't want to speak to him in the White House. There were too many leaks, and we know the White House is completely bugged. And we can see that things are in motion behind the scenes. And we need to remember back in time. Remember when in 1970, 1971, 72, when Kissinger was in the Middle East setting up the deals behind the scenes, setting up the petrodollar, that with Saudi Arabia, other Middle Eastern countries, where the United States would protect them militarily. They would use the dollar on the oil. This was all happening behind the scenes while the corporate media was telling us there was a shortage of oil. Trump now is doing the opposite. He knows the petrodollar system is coming to an end. He understands that deals have to be made within the Middle East. He understands that we need to have trade. And what we're seeing right now is that Trump's outreach to the Middle East cannot be divorced from China's own plans for the Middle East. China will now have to be involved. Now, the Belt and Road system, well, the Middle Eastern countries, they will be getting involved in this because they will need to, because their systems will no longer depend and actually live on the petrodollar system, because that's disappearing. So we can see this part of the plan where they're bringing in the Arab states, the Middle East, into this system. And Beijing, well, they're looking to set up and have and integrate China into East and West Asia. Now, we can see that the deep state doesn't want this to happen. They don't want any of this. And those that are invited are India. They're looking at other nations like Saudi Arabia. They're looking at nations like Libya, Iraq, Syria, Iran, to all join in on this Belt and Road system for open, free trade. Now, this has to be done at this point, because remember, trade is very important. As the petrodollar system completely disintegrates, the Middle Eastern nations, they will not be able to survive. And when he's out there talking about getting rid of terrorism, no, he really means it. He needs the terrorists, and that is the deep state. That's what he's really talking about, to come to an end. Now, what's going to happen here is that everything is going to shift from the west to the east. This is the plan. And again, the deep state is trying to put a stop to all of this. They don't want any of this to happen. They wanted their TPP. They wanted all of this stuff. And we need to remember, these deep state, the central banks, they wanted the United States to be a third world country, because the globalist view was that you needed to bring all the countries down to a certain level where everyone received the same pay, so those individuals could go anywhere in the world and work in all different countries, because it would be one currency, one pay, and the way of life would be the same everywhere. And it wouldn't be this high living standard of life. Only the top echelon, like the 1%, would be in that area, like we're seeing almost today. This is what they were trying to do. And they knew the United States would have to be brought down to that level. A nationalist/globalist would contain everything in the United States and keep the way of life the way it is today. Plus, have trade with countries around the world by joining a free trade system, because we will not have the US dollar as a reserve currency where countries take on the dollar, they keep it in reserves, and they send the products back to the United States because they have to keep those dollars in reserves to pay for the oil. That system's coming to an end. This is why he needs to be both, because we need to be part of that trade system, because we will no longer be able to use the dollar as a reserve currency. We won't be able to use the dollar as putting pressure on all these countries to make them do what we want. Countries will no longer have to hold the dollar in reserve, and as they receive these dollars, they have to send products back to the United States. This will no longer be in place. And this is why, at this point, these deals need to be made. Just like when we were coming off the gold standard and Kissinger was in the Middle East making deals behind the scenes, the same thing is happening right now, but the opposite way. That is what is happening. Now, Trump is heading out to the G7 summit. This does not include China or Russia. And the main topics for this G7 summit is terrorism, North Korea, and Trump's stance on climate change. Now, the G7 leaders, they're going to try to convince him that, yes, the United States needs to be part of the Paris Agreement. And Trump did promise that the United States will not be joining this. We will have to wait to see what he does. Will they influence him in joining the climate change? Now, we have to remember, all of these countries in the G7 summit, the deep state, a lot of these countries are part of the deep state, they're going to try to influence him and push him in the direction of the United States staying with the Paris Agreement. This is a real test for Trump at this point. How strong is he? How strong are those individuals trying to get rid of the deep state? Because this is what it really comes down to. And we'll have to see what he does at this point, because he might fold and all these plans might go down the toilet because they still have a lot of influence. Remember, the deep state's been around for a very long time. They're entrenched in government. That's why they're the deep state. There's a lot of individuals trying to get rid of Trump at this point, and we can see there's a lot of pressure to remove him because they don't want all of this stuff undone. And this is why we see the attack on Trump, and this is why we see it coming at him so hard and fast. Now, out in the Philippines, we understand that Duterte, he declared martial law on an island within the Philippines, and this is due to the Islamic State. Now, Duterte claims, and he's coming out with this information, that he is being targeted for an assassination by the CIA. Now, we know they want the Philippines to encircle China. This was the plan from the beginning. And Duterte, well, he doesn't want to work with the United States. He's working with China right now and Russia. And he's out there saying that he knows the CIA sent the Islamic State to his country to try to remove him and to assassinate him, which is very interesting because now these countries are actually calling out the CIA and the deep state, where they are the ones who created the Islamic State, fund the Islamic State. We even have Russia out there. The Russian Foreign Ministry is accusing the United States and NATO of supporting the Islamic State in Afghanistan. Basically, what they said is that U.S. and NATO, they are covering up their own support for the terrorists, which are the Islamic State. And what they're talking about is that, if you remember, the report came out that Russia was arming the Taliban, and the report came out that said they were not arming the Taliban. That was completely fake, phony, and false. But what the Russians are saying right now is they have documentation and proof that the U.S. is supporting the Islamic State in Afghanistan. Now, this is what they said. The U.S. detained but then released the son of the head of the terrorist Islamic movement of Uzbekistan. He is now an ISIS commander in Afghanistan. There was a night landing of 2 helicopters without identification in extremist-controlled territory in the Syad district. The helicopters then flew back to a NATO base. Now, this is where it gets interesting. They're saying that the U.S. resorted to a well-known trick of manipulating public opinion by presenting in the same context reports about the appearance of an unidentified helicopters in the Kunduz province. The facts we have at our disposal show that the reality is completely different. The Islamic State commandos who were going to buy arms from the Americans were caught at the same time with a huge sum of money, and the U.S. had to explain it away of what actually happened. And Russia tracked the helicopters. They knew exactly what was going on, and they have proof that yes, the deep state, the intelligence operatives, they are supporting and funding the Islamic State in Afghanistan. Now, the Italian Prime Minister is out there saying that NATO needs to speak with Russia. There needs to be a dialogue. It's enough of this Russian aggression. No one is believing this anymore, and we can see right now that whole thing is completely falling apart. Now, out in Syria, we see Russia and China, they share the same stance on the Syrian crisis. They're saying the Astana talks, that is the format that needs to be going forward. And we can see right now that they are all for a ceasefire. They are all for ensuring humanitarian access and creating more favorable conditions for the start of an exclusive intra-Syrian dialogue in Geneva. And we can see that China, Russia, Syria, they're looking to have peace. The deep state, they are still pushing their agenda to either split Syria or to get Assad. I think it's about to split Syria at this point because they realize there's no way they're getting into Damascus, because we could see at this point that the Islamic State, they are in retreat. They're losing ground in northern Syria, in the eastern Aleppo province. They're being steadily rolled back by the Syria's elite Tiger forces. In the south, the Islamic State suffered a dramatic setback. It was forced to concede a whopping 2,700 square kilometers south of Palmyra in just a few days. And we see right now that the Islamic State, they have nowhere to go at this point. They are pretty much done, and the deep state knows this. And we see that they are preparing and training paid mercenaries, because that's really what the Islamic State is all made up of. All the terrorist groups are made up of this, and they're preparing and getting ready to do something. Now, when is this going to happen? We don't know. We have reports, and this is coming from Mike Cernovich, saying that something might happen June 1st, and we're getting very close to that date. Patterns have shown us that normally this type of thing happens during the month of August, when Congress leaves and they go on vacation and they don't return until after Labor Day. Now, we're going to have to watch the situation very closely, because we can see that things are starting to unravel with many different things, especially with the Russian collusion, the Russian aggression, and we see that there is interest in the Seth Rich murder. And all of this is now starting to fall apart. The deep state is going to only let it get so far until they pull some type of an event out of their bag of tricks. And we can see right now, this is where we are headed. Now, at the same time, Trump and his administration, those people who are fighting against the deep state, they are preparing the United States for a complete reset of the system, which means the fiat system will completely disappear. A new system will be started up. The U.S. dollar as the reserve currency will no longer exist. We will have to go within the United States to support ourselves, like looking for oil. This is why he's looking in Alaska right now to start drilling. He's going to be starting to sell the reserve oil for trade around the world to bring in revenue. And this is going to start in 2018. Very interesting. We also see that he's looking at all the different land that was put up for collateral on the debt and seeing what natural resources are there. And this is all in preparation for the system coming down. And we can see that the central bank, well, they're doing the same exact thing, but except a little different. They're looking to keep their system going the way it is. Now, it will collapse, but what they're going to do is they're going to try to pump it up once again, showing that the central bank is saving the system the way it is. A lot of people are going to lose their wealth. The credit is going to freeze up, just like with the collapse that Trump is trying to do. The whole thing is going to be the same. The only difference is we will still be under the control of the central bank. We'll still be under control of the system where they create currency with interest attached. The new system is going to be with no interest attached, where the people actually create their currency, where the United States will be dependent on itself for a certain period of time, where we can rebuild manufacturing, we can rebuild people coming back to work. This is not going to happen in a day. It's not going to happen in a couple of months. This is going to take a long time for this to be done. But this is the plan. We'll have to see how all this plays out. But everyone needs to be ready and prepared for the system to come down. You need to be ready and prepared for a certain period of time, because it's not going to happen in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. It's going to take quite a while. Think about what happened when we were coming off the gold standard and going onto the petrodollar system, where everything was in flux for many years. Actually, there was a huge recession. People couldn't find jobs. You couldn't get oil. This time it's going to be worse, because we're coming off a system that is going to completely disappear and collapse. And we're all going to have to be ready for this, because we were on this global system and the whole system now is crashing. So get ready, get prepared, make sure you are ready for a period of time. Some people say 6 months, some people say a year, some people say 2 years, but just be ready for whatever is coming. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.